The Philippines people who live on exporting coconut are exposed to the increased rainfall. The vulnerabilities of increased rainfall. For the ecological side, water level increase, flood and landslide change forestry, plant condition of the main agriculture. And the economic side, reduce the main crop coconut and banana production, reduce the export of coconut and banana. And the social, it have some damage of the public commercial. For the political, Philippines government made the Climate Change Act of 2009. There also have some opportunities for increased rainfall. The ecological side changed the planting area size. The tropical crop in Philippines are fruit and coconut, but it will change to wheat and rice. And the economic cycle, Philippines cannot plant rice self-sufficient. The increase of rice production can save the money from importing rice. And the social side, the increase in economic government can put money on other public commercial and rebuild community commercial.
An ecological change is decreased rainfall. People and the agricultural product is exposed to this hazard. It will cause both vulnerability and opportunity. As for the vulnerability, it will cause water stress, particularly on forestry, agriculture, and livelihood, health, and human settlement. As for the economic side, it will limit agricultural production and will cause loss to their economy because they cannot export more agricultural products such as fruits. Therefore, the government cannot make profits by exporting as before. Also, it will affect the energy sufficiency program of the country. As for the opportunity, the water resources decreased, and water resource managers who experience a decrease in rainfall may have to explore new sources of supply, implement demand management activities, or invest in new treatment techniques. Also, water resource managers develop alternative resources of water supply and water treatment and invest new infrastructure. The government will make profits by making new investments.
Which poses for the Philippines is temperature increase. The vulnerabilities of this temperature increase are ecologically, the temperature increase makes it more difficult for crops to grow. Economically, the rice yields will be low, and this affects the Philippines because they're the eighth largest rice producer in the world, and leads to a drop in income. Socially, therefore, people are forced to compete for rice and jobs, and this exposure affects the people who work with and eat the rice. Another vulnerability is there will be more intense El Nino, which causes extreme weather that is hard to predict. Economically, extreme weather can damage land and infrastructure. Socially, people's homes can be destroyed, forcing them to move, and the exposure is mostly coastal regions are affected. Other areas are affected, but at lower intensities. The opportunities that can come out of this temperature increase can be destruction from El Nino, whether it provides opportunity for our infrastructure to be rebuilt. Economically, the warmer climate brings more tourism to the Philippines. Another vulnerability is the sea level rise in the Philippines. This vulnerability can affect fishing opportunities, which would be an ecological cause, politically, dependence on industrialization, socially, the displacement of people, and economically, the loss of productive agricultural land. The opportunity that can come from this is that some marine life will thrive ecologically and economically.
Like the Philippines leaves them especially vulnerable to destroyed infrastructure, eroded soil, and flooded coastal regions. Economic vulnerabilities could be anything from decreased production of agriculture, which leads to less exports and overall commerce, while political areas affected by natural disaster are vulnerable to political unrest / anarchy situations. Economic opportunity from these natural disasters would be to rebuild damaged infrastructure, which will boost construction and economic activity, giving another chance to rebuild foundation, buildings, power supplies, roads, wire systems stronger and better. Political opportunity could be to show the direct importance and devastation of climate change and the necessity of legislation reform towards renewable energy and global warming.
The Philippines were affected by both the Industrial Revolution and global imperialism. Before the Industrial Revolution, the Philippines were seen as a trading post for international trade. After the Industrial Revolution occurred, Europe created great demands for raw materials from the colonies. Unevenly distributed wealth resulted from the Industrial Revolution, and Governor General Basco had opened the Philippines to trade. This developed a market for manufactured goods, and as industrialization grew in the Philippines, so did greenhouse gas emissions and the destruction of its natural habitats. As for global imperialism, a small flow of European immigrants came with the opening of the Suez Canal, which cut the travel time between Europe and the Philippines by half. New ideas about government and society, which the friars and colonial authorities found dangerous, quickly found their way into the Philippines. The Freemasons and others spread the ideals of the American, French, and Spanish liberalism. They fought for independence from Spain, America, and Japan. The traditional way of life in the Philippines was influenced by Western society and resulted in the industrialization of the Philippines.
As you can see in the chart on the left, average fossil fuel energy consumption has steadily risen over the past few decades. In 1980, it was measured at 42.9%, while in 2012, 59.9%, which is a significant increase. The Philippines ranks 41st out of 196 countries in total emissions in the world, which is under 25% of entire world emissions. The Philippines ranks 156 in emissions per capita in the world. Fossil fuel burning has been on the rise despite efforts to cut emissions. In December of 2014, the Philippines pushed for international law requiring all nations to cut emissions, even other developing nations. Deforestation has had a long history and devastating effects in the Philippines. Over the course of the past 100 years, the amount of forest coverage in the Philippines dropped from 70% down to 20%. Only 3.2% of the original rainforest is left in the Philippines. 4 species native to the Philippines have been eradicated completely, while a total of 46 species are listed as endangered. Ineffective short-term legislation and deregulation has led to an abundance of over-deforestation and unsustainable practices, leading to massive deforestation in the Philippines. Deforestation is a major contributor to the reduction of biodiversity of plant and animal life, and also has a huge effect on the amount of erosion occurring in the Philippines, increasing the amount of damage done when floods and landslides occur. Illegal logging has led to increased loss of biodiversity and heavily heightened the impact of flooding, leading to increased damages to infrastructure, destruction of homes, and even death among citizens. The creation of the Suez Canal followed a flow of multiple European nations that settled and influenced the Philippines. Major Western influence on the Philippines that increased industrial production, logging, and cultivation of land. Global imperialism ultimately significantly increased the amount of speed of deforestation and logging in the Philippines, as well as its negative effects.
As for the dominant lifestyles of different groups, there are 2 groups. As for the high-income citizen, they will consume more carbon footprint. For example, they will use air conditioner in the summer, and also they will use cars to work. The rich, for example, may choose quality over quantity, which translates into more hours of work to make those goods. Also, they will buy more food, but actually they don't eat much more than the poor. As for the low-income citizen, the poor suffers from climate change most. They understand the environmental harm they do by collecting recyclables, reusing the bags, and so on. For example, low-income people will walk to work or take a bus or ride bicycles to work. And they will not use air conditioner in the summer as much as rich people do because they want to save money. Moreover, the poor people will be more engaged in pollution reduction behaviors, only if they can easily control the actions to be done, such as reusing plastic bags or preaching environmental issues to others. Also, they don't have enough money, and so they will buy less food. Therefore, the low-income citizens will consume less carbon footprint.
The climate change have a big influence on vulnerable populations. Climate change hits the poor first and worst. The carbon footprint of Philippines poorest people represent just 3% of the total, but people living in Philippines are 10 times more likely to be affected by the climate-related disasters such as floods and typhoon compared to those living in the industrial world. Climate change impacts on Philippines' rural women. In the aftermath of climate change, induced natural disasters, women's insecurity increase more than men's. Climate change particularly affects food, water, and health, which are the base of women's livelihoods and social ecological responsibilities. Indigenous peoples still use traditional agroforestry practice. Most of them are dependent on the land and the natural resource from these ecosystems. They are in the forefront of climate change impacts the streets. Coastal hit by the climate change because climate change is expected to lead to more intense typhoons, higher sea levels. Storm surge are projected to affect about 42% of coastal populations, which are particularly vulnerable to the flood due to less secure infrastructure, reduce the access to clean water.
Economy in order to positively help their environment. One of these trade-offs is that agriculture and wood production industries will suffer from reducing the amount of deforestation. New environmentally friendly infrastructure would require the removal of old buildings and practices and a large investment of federal funding. Another is planting new crops that conserve soil nutrition will not have as high of a demand and profit for the agriculture industry. Focusing on less industrialized growth, localizing economy-dependent industries will hinder the growth of the Philippines economy. Making their economy environmentally based will give the Philippines less economic influence and dependence on the global scale.
The Philippines got involved in the UNFCCC on August 2, 1994. As a developing nation, they are categorized as a non-Annex I country. Climate change places a huge burden on the Philippines, therefore acting on climate change is a critical factor that determines their survival as a nation. They got involved in the UNFCCC to try and combat the negative effects of climate change, as well as encourage other developing nations to do the same. I will discuss 4 main instances of involvement the Philippines has had in the UNFCCC. The first instance is the initial National Communication Document, which was submitted May 19, 2000. The document contains a national inventory of anthropogenic emissions, a description of steps taken or visualized by the country to implement its commitment, and other information relevant to the achievement of the objectives of the Convention. This document is very important because every country must submit this after entering the Convention. The next major involvement is the Climate Change Act of 2009. This law, which was enacted on July 27, 2009, serves as an action plan that lays out the strategies, initiatives, and activities to prepare the country for the inevitable effects of climate change. Both the mitigation and adaptation strategies aim to build a more climate risk-resilient Philippines. In the end, achieving the goals is deemed attainable with the support and assistance of all stakeholders. This includes the national and local government units, the private sector, the non-governmental organizations, and the local communities. Finally, the last major involvement I will discuss is the National Climate Change Action Plan. The document assesses the current situation of the country with regard to climate change risk and outlines the strategic direction taken for 2011 till 2028. The framework strategy includes prioritization of food and water security, ecological and environmental stability, human security, climate smart industries and services, sustainable energy, and knowledge and capacity development. The ultimate goal is to build the adaptive capacities of communities, increase the resilience of vulnerable sectors and natural ecosystems, and optimize mitigation opportunities towards sustainable development. Throughout their history, the Philippines has never been a main contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, mostly because they are not very industrialized. However, they have had economic relationships with several developed industrial nations. While the Philippines' economy depends on these high-emission countries, the emissions are destroying their forests, agriculture, and coastal regions. This causes a major dilemma for the Philippines: save their economy or save their land. As you can see from their major involvements in the UNFCCC, they have chosen their land. The Philippines promotes combating climate change through binding political agreements and will never give up the fight against climate change.
These recommendations consist of demand developed countries, specifically the United States, that are large greenhouse gas emitters to reduce emissions through legally binding policies. They should also lead by example by having a high standard for greenhouse gas reduction within the Philippines, developing environmentally friendly infrastructure, using more efficient agricultural practices, and protecting the remaining forests from deforestation. Other recommendations are to request relief from developed countries that will help the Philippines adapt and mitigate to rising sea levels, flooding, temperature increases, drought, disaster relief, etc. Also, until international agreements are made, the Philippines must move the people from the more vulnerable areas, especially exposed to typhoons and other natural disasters of the country, to safety and provide aid for global warming caused illness. Public health must be the main priority.
As for the cost-benefit analysis, I think the benefit will outweigh the cost by our recommendations. Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change in the world, and every year there are some climate disasters such as typhoon, and it will always cause lots of loss, especially the economic loss. Also, lots of people will die and get hurt during the climate disaster. Our recommendation will reduce the economical loss because we remove the people from the vulnerable area, and less people will suffer from the climate change. Although there are costs associated with removing, the whole country's benefit will outweigh the cost. Also, Philippines is now a developing country, and we are not able to adapt to the climate change. For example, when flooding happens, there will be infrastructure loss, economic loss, and etc. And we recommend the relief from the developed country that will absolutely benefit our country and help our country rebuild our infrastructure. And we will also take some measurements to build new infrastructure to prevent suffering much from the disaster.
The social effects of these recommendations would have a positive impact on how citizens live their everyday lives and interact with the environment. Environmentally friendly infrastructure would encourage healthy and sustainable transportation among citizens. More affordable and available public transportation would not only cut down on emission and increase efficiency, but encourage interaction among citizens and build a sense of community. Other forms of beneficial infrastructure, such as more bike rides, stairs to elevators, increased parking price, and non-motorized transport lanes would encourage transport that doesn't require fuel to be burned, as well as encouraging healthy exercise for citizens.
So each country is affected in a unique way by climate change depending on its economy, development, location, and climate. Also, an inherent problem in these games is that each country is looking out for its own best interests and is assuming every other country is doing the same. This proposal would severely reduce the worst offenders as well as everyone producing greenhouse gases, making for a more level playing field and bringing down the total emissions in the entire world, which will benefit everyone.
Although the Philippines contributes to under 25% of the entire world's emissions, They greatly feel the repercussions of high amounts of greenhouse gases in the atmospheres. The Philippines is a major proponent of reducing greenhouse gases in every country, even other developing countries. The UNFCCC considers equity as common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. The Philippines agrees with this definition. Instead of placing an overall cap on emissions, the solution would be to have differentiated limits on each country's emissions. For example, it is unrealistic to expect China to have the same emissions cap as the Philippines. The goal is for countries to decrease their emissions relative to their highest emission. Developed countries also need to aid developing countries in combating the negative effects of climate change. Countries who can afford to help struggling countries should provide aid in any way they can. The main greenhouse gas emitters should be held responsible for aiding the countries who feel the effects of their emissions, like the Philippines.
The concerns of vulnerable groups. Poor people in the Philippines was estimated at 19.2% of population, or about 80.4 million people. Most of the poor in Philippines live in areas and work in the agriculture sector, mainly in farming and fishing. The recommendation developing environmentally friendly infrastructure will help poor people in Philippines to get better living environment. Request relief from developed countries can help reduce the cost of Philippine government. That can reduce the fee need to pay to government. And training women using more efficient agricultural practice increase the work opportunity for women to help them up to the ladder. Indigenous people and coastal people. Recommendation: Philippines must move the people from more vulnerable areas of the country to safe. Indigenous people and coastal people are living in the remote area without complete medical technology. The recommendation help a lot for these two vulnerable groups.